Your first time here? Anybody first time? All right. So just a little review. The first class was about how you can never turn a person into an object of use, right? And in order not to use a person, both parties have to agree to a good that you're both going to try to achieve, okay? If you don't agree to a good, then you're using the other person or manipulating the other person. So you must treat another person as another subject. This is not subjectivism as in no reality, but that this person is a subject. So a person is not a hammer or a dog that you can just use for your own benefit. That is why when you become the CEO of a large company, I want you to ban the use of the word human resources, because people are not iron ore to be used. They must always be treated with respect and dignity, okay? And let's just think about that for a moment with a company. That means if you have a company, if Max would hire me to build something, not only would he have to give me a just wage, but in order for it not to be used, me and Max would both have to agree on the good that we're producing. We both have to be producing a good that we would agree with, okay? If I didn't agree with the good that Max is doing, it would no longer be a true relationship. Let's say Max is doing something evil, and let's say he was selling masks that are guaranteed to keep COVID out, and they did no such thing, okay? Max would never do that, by the way. But let's say that was the case. If that was the case and I agreed to that, I would be using Max for the money he was giving me, and he would be using me in order to make masks, right? So it'd be a bilateral agreement of use, okay? In the sexual sphere, where do we see that most concretely? By the bilateral agreement of use in the sexual sphere. No, even more. Prostitution, exactly, right? It is prostitution. You're not really engaged in a good. You just have a mutual exchange of goods, if you will, that's based on an evil. Okay, and then yesterday, last class, let me just look at my notes here a little bit. So, in the last class, we talked about the end of marriage, right? What marriage is about. What's marriage about? What are the three ends of marriage? Anybody remember? Children, that's one. 3 children would be the 3 ends, right? No. Children is one. What's the other end of marriage? Mutual support. Very good. What is the third end of marriage? Third end of marriage is the legitimate end of the sexual desire. Okay, you have a sexual desire. It's a desire, it's a human desire, it's a good desire in itself, and it has a legitimate end. And that legitimate end is within the context of marriage, okay? So what's not listed as one of the goods of marriage that you would think would be there? Love, yeah. What's love got to do with it? Got to do it. All right, so the reason love is not in there is because all 3 of these ends are supposed to be done within the context of love, because as human persons, everything we do should be done in love, right? And so the 3 ends of marriage are done within love. Then we talked about love as attraction, that you really have no... Can you really form who you're attracted to, Isabel? No, you can't, unfortunately. So when you break up with that guy, don't come up with about 100 lame excuses. Just look at him and say, I'm no longer attracted to you. Because that's generally the way it is, you know. You generally break up with somebody when I'm just not attracted to you anymore. I thought I was, but I've lost that loving feeling, right? So, and we talked about love as desire. it's more than just attraction, it's a desire. Then we talk about what true love is, and true love is love as what? Maybe. Love as goodwill. Goodwill. So authentic love is when you will the good of the other person. Okay, that's what makes authentic love. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the psychological analysis of love. All right? Where does love come from? And what love are we talking about? Am I talking about the love that I have for all of you and the love that you have for me? Hopefully you have love for me. Are we talking about that kind of love? As deep as it is and it's so profound, there's nothing like I'd die for you. I'd die for everybody in this room. It's love, right? There's no greater love than this and to lay down your life for your friends. Is that the love that we're talking about here? Absolutely not, because that love does not excite us nearly as much as the kind of love that happens when two people fall in love, get engaged, and get married and start having wee little ones running around their ankles, right? So that's the love that we're talking about. All right. So we're going to talk here a lot about emotion and sense impression. Emotion, what's emotion? John Paul II would say emotion is the reaction to a value of an object that impresses on the senses, right? If you just totally love macaroni and cheese comes out, you see it, it's hot, it smells like macaroni and cheese. What does macaroni and cheese? Doesn't smell like much. But anyway, you get a sense impression, right? And you have an emotional reaction to it, okay? So if you look at emotions, what emotions are, okay? It can be strong or weak. It can be superficial or deep, right? So there's your emotion. Strong or weak, superficial or deep. Obviously, where do most young love relationships exist? They exist right here. In this quadrant, right there. Strong, but somewhat superficial. They come and they go. Is there something evil about that? Absolutely not. I had a crush in every single class. Very strong, very superficial. Okay. So, but obviously, what we're looking for, what we'd absolutely desire is right here, right? Very, very deep and very strong. Unfortunately, for us, maybe good because it'd probably destroy us, most of our emotions are not strong and very deep at the same time. When you think of in literature or in the lives of the saints, what strong and deep emotion would you come up with? Probably the biggest one is when St. Teresa of Avila had an angel appear to her and throw a dart into her heart. You know that story? She felt this rapture of love, and as the angel pulled the dart out of her heart, it felt like her whole inside was coming out with that. And she felt so much love that she thought she would have died if it would have gone for another, half of a second, okay? That left a very, very deep sense impression on her, okay? I would say that for most of us, the emotions we're really striving for are more right here. This is the Badger game, right? The Badgers win on Friday. Right? We're very excited about that, but that goes away after about, 48 hours. But we generally are after those type. Okay. All right. The sense impression of the opposite sex is often accompanied by an emotion, either positive or negative. Why? Because the opposite sex has a definite value for us. So when we see the opposite sex, there's usually an emotional content to it. So sensuality. So we're going to talk about sensuality. Sensuality, good thing or a bad thing? It's an awesome thing, right? A sensual person has much more richness to his life, right? Although it can be a bad thing if you have really heightened senses. For example, if you have a really heightened sense of music, you will probably hate 90% of the masses you go to because of the fact that music just is going to kind of hurt you a little bit, right? And so, to have really good sensual abilities is not always a positive thing. Sensuality always implies experience of particular value. In this case, a sexual value connected with the body of a person of the opposite sex. It is oriented toward a body as what? It's oriented toward the body as a potential object of enjoyment. All right? So here's Jack. Here's Jack. We should just say Noah Joe because Noah Joe is built like this. Oops, I'm sorry. Got a little carried away there with Noah. There we go. There's Noah Joe. There's Susie. Yay. We love Susie. She's got sandals on today. She's wearing her sandals. All right. So, Noah Joe, I'm sorry, I won't use Noah Joe anymore. Jack sees Susie, and he looks at her, and he says, wow, look at Susie. She's got those well-formed big toes. They are so awesome. All right? And it really gets him excited, right? Because he sees those toes as an object of enjoyment. He wants to hold on to the toes. They just give him a lot of excitement, a lot of those two big toes that she's got, right? And so he's really, really excited about that. All right. So he sees it as an object of enjoyment. Okay, in itself, that is not necessarily a bad thing. God gave Susie those big, beautiful toes that she's got, and in a sense, they're there for people to enjoy. However, the difficulty is that sensuality interferes with Jack's ability to apprehend beauty, because beauty is an object of contemplation. Okay. So beauty is an object of contemplation. It's not an object of sensual enjoyment. We enjoy beauty, but we enjoy beauty on a spiritual sense, okay? As a beautiful thing that the intellect apprehends. That's how we enjoy beauty. We don't enjoy beauty as something that is meant to give me sensual gratification. So as Jack is looking at Susie's toes, and seeing those toes as an object of sensual enjoyment, what's getting in the way then is he can no longer see those toes as an object of beauty, right? The way a podiatrist would, right? He would see those toes and he would see them as an object of beauty, right? And so when an artist looks at a woman's naked body, if he's a true artist, he's not seeing her body as an object of pleasurable enjoyment. He's seeing it as a beautiful object that he's contemplating, that he's taking joy in. So you can see, as a sense, there's nothing wrong with a naked body. Just on a side note, a naked body is not pornographic. Okay? There's nothing pornographic about a naked body. Pornography is the sexual act displayed to a third party. That's what pornography is. A naked body in itself is quite beautiful. It is meant to be an object of contemplation. Why don't we just show a lot of naked bodies around, though? Because generally speaking, it moves very quickly to seeing the body as an object of sensual gratification. And you never want to reduce a person to an object of sensual gratification. Okay. John Paul II says, the orientation of sensuality is a matter of spontaneous reflexes. It is a natural thing. Because what is it oriented towards, Isabel? What do you think? What is it oriented towards? When Jack looks at her beautiful toes, well, he's not looking at her two beautiful toes. Let's say his eyes go from his toes to other things that Susie possesses. Okay? Why is he having that natural reaction? It's aimed at procreation. So sensuality in itself is a good thing, and that it's aimed at procreation, because procreation is the most important thing we do as a species. And that's why we don't want to be ashamed of any of this stuff. We need to procreate, which is why I talk about marriage all the time, because nobody's procreating anymore. That's what we need to do, right? Okay, but naturally, it's aimed at procreation. It's not aimed at enjoyment for its own sake. Okay? So it should be aimed at procreation, not as enjoyment for its own sake. All right? So, would this be a good way to choose your spouse? To look at your spouse and say, wow, I really want to enjoy this person's body. I want to marry this person. Would that work? John Paul II says, yeah, it would work. If it weren't for the fact that the object of our desire does not demand a different attitude. Okay? So Susie is sitting here, right? And Jack is looking at her and choosing her because he wants her body to procreate. And she's like, wait a minute. You know, I'm not just a body for procreation. I'm a human person, right? And so I need you to look at me as a human person, not just as a body, all right? A person cannot be an object of use, and a body can be detached from a person. Thus, the reaction of conscience to sensuality, which is why men, at least all the men in this room, kind of have a natural shame about their reaction to a body. Because when they have that reaction to a body and they see that, when they see somebody that they have a natural sensual desire for gratification, their conscience reacts to that and says, I can't detach this person's body from the person. So sensuality in itself is not love, obviously, right? Well, that has a strong role to play. Rare is the man that falls in love with a woman who is not first attracted to her on a sensual level, right? I'm sure that happens in different places, but I've never seen it personally, okay? In a sense, rare is the woman, too, that doesn't have that same experience. You know, a woman is, although there's other things usually going on with a woman, she, too, has that same sensual desire. And she, too, has to learn, obviously, to... all right, so... John Paul II goes on to say, this is a very important line, sensual excitability as a natural and congenital characteristic of a concrete person is not in itself morally wrong, okay? To be sensually excited by somebody's body is not morally wrong, just as listening to getting excited about good music is not morally wrong, right? So... It's kind of like this. If you really got excited by music and really good singing, and you met a woman who sang really beautiful, and you loved the song she sang, and that get you really emotionally excited, would that be wrong? Absolutely not, right? Would it be wrong for you to marry her just for her voice? Yeah, you got some difficulties there, right? You know? And so that's the same with this emotional excitability with the body. There's nothing evil about it. John Paul II says, in itself, it is not morally wrong. these are his words. An exuberant and readily aroused sensuality is the stuff from which a rich, if difficult, personal life may be made. So to be easily excited makes for a rich life, right? I mean, it's much more exciting to have a crush in every class than it is to only have a crush in one class, right? So that's why I'm always like, when I see people and they only got like one crush, I'm like, I never had any problems developing numerous crushes when I was in college. So, all right. So this is, that didn't work out very well. All right. So sensuality is found in both men and women, right? But when we think of sensuality, who do we usually think of? Guys, right? Generally speaking. But it is obviously women can be just as sensually excitable as men, especially if at the time when they are fertile, gets them more sensually excited. All right. Now we're going to talk about sentiment. Sentiment. Sentiment, says John Paul II, is the emotional response, the sense impression of a person, not simply to the body, but to the whole person as such in their sexual attributes. Okay, what do I mean by that? All right, so we're just going to, again, I want you to know that both men and women are sensual and sentimental. It's just for the sake, we're going to put sentiment in the woman. All right. So here's Susie. And she's looking at Jack. All right. And what is she looking at? She's looking at his masculine attributes. All right. She sees Jack at a dance. He's a really good dancer. She sees him read at Mass, and he just has a great commanding presence. She sees him leading a mission trip, and he's just a great leader. She sees the fact that he has a charge card with a lot of money. She sees, and he knows how to dress well. And he wears great cologne, right? And so she's attracted to him on an emotional level. This emotional level is directed at Jack in his totality, but is it directed at Jack as a person? It seems like it's directed as Jack as a person, but it's not. It's because it's more taking in the whole person, but it's still simply directed at Jack's masculine attributes, because that's what Susie desires. If Susie didn't desire masculine attributes, who would she be excited about? She'd be excited about her roommate, Jill, right? But she's desiring masculine attributes. John Paul II says, sentiment differs from sensuality not in its basis, because the basis is still the self, but it's in content. In sentiment, the sexual value is in these whole attributes of the person, not just the body. Sentiment is ordered toward an affection that appears free from use. This is why you got to be careful with sentiment, because it looks much more like love than just raw sensuality. It appears free from use. Sentiment gives a desire for nearness, for proximity, a longing to be alone together, right? That's sentiment, this desire to be alone together. So you can see how young love kind of goes astray, right? Because Susie sees Jack, right? And they've been looking at each other from afar. Jack he's geared into his sensuality. Her body just makes him excited. And Susie, this man, is just a total package, right? And they're at the dance, and all of a sudden they talk a little bit, and Susie says, I just want to be alone with you. And Jack goes, awesome. I just want to be alone with you too, right? And because they just want to be alone. But the person with the sentiment, their desire to be alone is just to be alone. So off they go into the woods, and they sit on a log, and there they are alone. And Jack is like, now what? And Susie's kind of like, let's just sit here. And Jack's like, this ain't any fun, So we got to start doing something. And what they usually start doing is what Susie doesn't want to do, but she figures, well, if I do this, you'll stay alone with me, and then we'll be happy, right? John Paul II says, since men take generally a more active role, they tend to experience sensuality to a higher degree. In the woman, sensuality tends to be more hidden under sentiment. Sentimental love, especially in the young, can easily endow through the imagination values on the person that do not truly exist. You ever had that experience? Where you fall in love with somebody, and through sentiment, you start to give them values, and they don't really have those values? It used to happen all the time with my sisters. If my sisters didn't like a guy and they came back from a date, they'd be, oh, he did that. You know what he did? He did this. Oh, gross. I'm thinking, oh, that sounds pretty cool, But if they really liked the guy, oh, he did this. I'm like, that is so lame. Oh, no, it was awesome, And so it's just funny how that imagination works in. If you just really have a strong emotional desire for a person, suddenly you build up these things about the person. Then you have this girlfriend who's going out with this guy, and you're like, why are you doing it? Well, and then they see the potential in him, and the potential is like, he does have the potential to be a long-distance runner, but right now he weighs 380 pounds. I don't see it happening. It's there. I know it is. Okay. Sensuality tends to be stays focused on the objective values, while sentiment easily projects desired values onto the other, which is difficulty with sentiment. It projects onto the other person the values that you want to have in a person. This easily leads then to disillusionment later on. And often I deal with people that, when the disillusionment sets in, unfortunately 3 years after they're married with 2 kids, all of a sudden they realize, wow, I thought this person was like this, and it's not, okay? All right, so what we got here is we've got sensuality and sentiment. Those are 2 beautiful things. Without them, we could hardly speak of people falling in love or having love, right? Because even in your same-sex friends, there's a certain sensual and sentimental gratification to that relationship, right? Long-distance runners tend to like other long-distance runners, and, we tend to, the people that you have in your life tend to have, in a certain sense, the same, they have some sensual and sentimental content, all right? However, what we want to do is we want to integrate love into these things. Truth and freedom lie outside of material considerations. Truth and freedom are spiritual realities. Without the ability to discover truth, man would be determined, right? If we couldn't discover truth, we'd be like the animals, just running by emotions and instincts, right? Especially with sentimental love. Who loves you in a certain sense based on sentiment? In some ways. Your dog. Your dog loves you, He loves you. He loves to be with you. He loves just to be with you. It's a sentimental thing, right? Love is always a matter of the spirit. Whatever comes from determination and compulsion is not love. So love requires a free commitment of the will, and that requires truth. Sensual and sentimental love only have a subjective truth. It's a subjective truth, and why is it? Because the sensuality, where does that exist? That exists in him. And this sentiment exists in Susie. That's where it exists. It's purely subjective. It's within the person. It's an experience they have within themselves. True love requires an objective reality. It's this transition that integrates love, okay? All right. So that's what we're going to try to do. And so when you meet somebody and you're in a relationship with them, whatever that means, you're in a relationship with them. Joe and I are friends. Are we in a relationship? I'm in a relationship? No. Okay. I just don't know what that means. All right. So, you meet somebody. We got this strong sentiment going on. We got this emotions going on. Generally, what people tend to do, at least men, is if they think they can move from this to this, they've done something. If I can just move from sensuality to sentiment, I've done something. But sentiment just hides as love. It just hides as love, but it's not love. Okay. And we'll get into this. Can sensuality be selfish? Absolutely it can be, right? Because it's just subjective. Can sentiment be selfish? Absolutely. Absolutely it can be. And the difficulty is that sensuality usually exhibits itself as selfishness pretty upfront, where the sentiment kind of hides as love, so it can be a little bit more difficult to see. All right. So a person is an embodied spirit that possesses his own interior life. So the value, and this is key, the value of a person is distinct from particular values in a person. Thus, a person's sex is that the person? Is your sex who you are? It's not. It's not. It's a value in a person. It's not the value of the person. It's not the value of the person, okay? And so all of these things that make you attracted to a person of the opposite sex, you can't, in a sense, love. You can love that, and you should love it, but it's like loving the color of their hair. Can you love the color of somebody's hair? Absolutely you can, right? But you can't confuse it with loving the person. So no matter how much of their sexual attributes you love in totality, I love your hair, I love the sound of your voice, I love the way you look at the world, I love your, all your feminine beauty, I love your feminine genius. You're still not loving the person. You're just loving the sexual attributes that they possess. Now, if you came up to a woman, if Max was dating a woman, he proposed to her and says, I don't love any of your sexual attributes, I just love you as a person, what would she say? you can take your ring and go home, right? Because there's not a woman out there or man that doesn't want to be esteemed and looked up to for their sexual attributes, right? You know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just you cannot confuse it with authentic love. You can't confuse it with authentic love. Love is the love of the person, right? And in a sense, too, and you will experience this after you're married. I mean, think of your brother. If you're a woman, think of your brother. If you're a man, think of your sister. Does her sexual attributes help you to love them, or do they get in the way? They get in the way. Let's be quite honest about that. Your brother, I wish he was less of a guy, because he just, in your brothers and sisters, very often it's their sexual attributes that kind of get on your nerves. And why is that? Because we tend to be most naturally attracted to people who are like us, right? That's what we find most naturally attractive. But what's at work here is the desire for what? Brianna, what's at work here? The desire for what? What do you have a deep desire for? Don't be ashamed. A baby. Yeah, because she's engaged. So, we have this deep desire for children that is deeper than our consciousness even, that's propelling us to the opposite sex, because God wants us to propagate, right? And so he's put within us this deep desire for the opposite sex. And we experience it through sentiment and sensuality. And that's what's propelling us towards each other, okay? Now, so you're attracted to somebody because of these sexual attributes. But in order for love to go from attraction and desire to goodwill, you have to love the person. And that's the beautiful thing about marriage. As different as men and women are, we are much more similar in that we are human persons. Okay, we are human persons with free will and intellect. And that's what binds us together, right? That is why it's great to fall in love with somebody that has more spiritual values. Because a person with more spiritual values will be more able to love you as a person. Where a person who's really oriented to sensual and sentimental values, if it's, they'll have a more difficult time making that transition. So that's why, and this is Father Eric now, this is not John Paul II. But because, as Alistair McIntyre pointed out, we live in a world where value is based on our emotional reaction to things. That bases our morality. So often people decide whether or not to marry somebody based on the emotional value they experience in that, right? Which would be okay if that was infallibly orientated towards two people who could really love each other as persons. So that's why if you really want to see how much your spouse is going to love you after you're married, see how well they love their sisters and brothers and mother and father and their friends. That's a much stronger indication of their ability to love you than what they're doing for you based on sentiment and sensuality. Because it's hard to discern whether they're good to you just based on they want the goods, right? I mean, you can start to see it over time as they let their guard down. All right. However, what the emotions tend to react to is the person's sexual values. Love demands the integration of that love into the love of the person as a person. Without this, we cannot speak of actual human love. John Paul II, this is a quote of his. Generally, when I read from this, I'm reading my paraphrasing of what he wrote, unless I quote it. So, quote, love in the fullest sense of the word is a virtue, not just an emotion, and still less a mere excitement of the senses. For this reason, love cannot be found in sensuality alone or in sentiment alone. each of these bypass the real person. So as Susie focuses on sentiment, the more she focuses on the sentiment of the relationship, and the more Jack focuses on the sensuality of the relationship, the less capable they're going to be of really focusing on the person. Okay? Now, this is Father Eric speaking. What I observe in the good Catholic world is like, this is like, whoa, we're going to put a big box around this. No, no, no. You go to confession, my dear young man and my dear young woman, and let's not have any of that. All right? So, but what do all relationships aiming towards a child desire? They desire a feeling of closeness and a feeling of stability, a feeling that we belong to each other, right? Well, if you have sex with somebody, you feel like you belong to them, and they feel like, and you feel like, it just gives you a feeling of stability. I've had sex with you. Obviously, we're an item, right? We just had sex. At least that's the way it was when I was in college. Not that I've had that experience, I want you to know, but that's just the way, that's just what I observed, right? You have sex with someone. All right, if you say no to that, and you want that experience of closeness and durability, and we're together, what do you do as Catholics? You double down on this. If we're not going to have that, we're going to have this. And this just feeds right into this poor girl's heart, right? She gets all that. She gets all that. I want this sentimental experience of having you in my life. But so that's why I say that these relationships right now are a little out of balance. Kind of because it's usually the woman who's getting more of that sentimental feeling that she desires, and the guy's just sitting there, kind of like, okay, maybe, how much can I kiss her and not have Father Eric beat me up in spiritual direction, So, all right. So we want to love the real person. So what does this love do? This love gives you a strong desire to want to belong to the other person. First of all, any questions on that? Does it all make sense? I see a lot of kind of dejected looks out there. Does it all make sense? Any pushback? No? Okay. You sure? Yep. Funny you should ask. You should not kiss her any more than you would kiss your sister or your mother. Because what are you allowed? You're allowed to show affection. You're not allowed to arouse sensual gratification. Okay? Now, there's a certain sensual gratification that comes just from holding. I mean, you like to hold on to, your brother, your sister. You know what I mean? Little kids. There's a sensual gratification to your friends, but you're not to arouse that aspect of sensual gratification that excites the sexual appetite. So, every once in a while, the girls, well, French kissing doesn't do that for me, Father. And it's like, well, you French kiss your grandpa, you know what I mean, to show affection? Is that something you would do? I don't think so, right? So that's all you should do. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the same thing too is, if you would kiss, I would say that if you would kiss your girlfriend with the intent of that if you kissed her in a way that is meant to excite sensual gratification, excitability, yes, that would be a sin. Yeah. So French kissing is a simulation of the sexual act. You know what I mean? So it's kind of meant to excite that, right? If a woman, but see, that's where generally guys are more excited than women are. You know, some women could do that, you know, forever and not get excited, right? And so for them, it might not be a sin. You know, if you could do that and not get sexually excited, that would not be a sin. So at the same time, you have to be a little careful, because if you're, you know, a guy could hold somebody's hands and get sexually excited. Is it a sin for him to hold his hands? You know, no. You know, to hold her hand, no. So there's, I think, so just doing something with somebody that gets you sexually excitable is not sinful if you're just doing a natural thing. You know, like holding hands, something you do with your sister. But I think if you're petting in such a way that it's not something you do with your sister and it gets you sexually excited, that's a sin.
I would push back.
Yeah, I could say that's okay. Yeah, okay, fine, yeah. That's fine. So I would not hold my sister's hand for, 25 laps around the ice rink, for instance, right? All right. So love forces a person to want to detach from his own autonomy and surrender himself to another person. This is done with the expectation that it will enrich, not impoverish the person. This self-giving can have its full value only when it involves and is the work of the will. Okay? So it's intellect and a will that makes you a human person. To the extent that you're not using your intellect and will is the extent that you're acting like an animal. You're not acting like a human person. And people sometimes get married based not on the intellect and the will, they just get based on the fact that they're so emotionally attached to this person, they can't imagine not being married to him anymore, okay? Which can work in your favor if you really want to marry a girl and she doesn't want to marry you. If you just hang out with her long enough, she'll give up and just say, okay. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen, you know. I've gone out with this guy for 7 years. I guess we're going to get married, you know. And so that's why I think you should make the decision whether or not this is a person you would marry before you become emotionally attached to them. I'm not saying you have to make the decision that you will marry this particular person. I'm just saying you want to make the decision that this is a person I would be happy married to, and you want to make that decision before you become emotionally attached to them. Otherwise, your intellect and your will is not going to be making a free decision. It's going to be trapped. It's going to be very hard to detach from that emotional involvement to actually make a free decision. Okay. And I meet men like that all the time. Yeah, Father, I thought I did not marry out of love. I just got lucky. You know, he made a decision based on his sensual desires and sentiment, and it worked out. And I think this is why many of these marriages are failing, because you can't base a marriage on sentiment and sensuality. You have to base it on an objective truth that I see this person as a person, I can love this person as a person. So just on a side note, too, this is my analogy. If you look at your emotions and if you look at your intellect and your will, so your intellect is mom in the front seat of the car. The will is dad driving the car. And imagine dad's driving, he's the will. So he determines where you go. And the intellect is mom. And dad can't hear the kids, but mom can. Okay? So mom's listening to the kids. And the kids are screaming, McDonald's, McDonald's, McDonald's. And mom's going, no, 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 no. And finally, because we're going to eat when we get home. They're on a long car trip. And the kids are the emotions screaming, we want McDonald's, we want McDonald's. And mom is saying, no, we're going to eat when we get home. Finally, mom gets so tired of the kids screaming, she goes to dad and says, all right, pull in the McDonald's over there. Okay, All right, well, who made that decision? The intellect and the will made it, because you can't make any decision without the intellect and will coordinated in the same objective thing that you're choosing. But who really made the decision? The emotions, the kids in the back seat, right? And so that to be truly free as a human being is to not have emotions. This is where the Stoics get wrong. The Stoics are like, well, let's not have emotions because then I'll be free. That's not the way to go through life. Emotions make for a very rich and beautiful life. You know, it's fun to be around emotional people as long as they know how to deal with their emotions, right? That's why we kind of like Brett Favre a little bit more than Aaron Rodgers, some of us. We like Aaron Rodgers because he doesn't throw as many interceptions as Brett Favre. But people love Brett Favre because of the emotional way he played football. You know, you just like that excitement, right? It's fun to be around people who get excited. It's not fun to be around people who can't control their emotions, though. And so this is what you're trying to do. So just, as again, to repeat myself, if you're smart, you're going to you can never allow yourself to become emotionally attached to somebody until you're convinced that this would be an okay person to be married to. All right? So in order to give yourself, you have to give with your will. This would be use if it existed only on the level of mutual pleasure. Sexual expression then can only be the expression of a union that has already taken place. Okay? So sexual expression is supposed to be based on the fact that you've already given yourself to each other through your will to love the other person, which is why we reserve sexual expression till after marriage when the will has firmly been implanted. All right? Love is a reciprocal gift of self that includes essential and sentimental components. As such, it is an objective reality. The objective reality is based on the true good of each person as a person, independent of sexual values. So when you marry, you're saying, I'm loving you independent of your sexual values. It's your sexual values that brought me to the altar. But now I am proclaiming my love to you, which is to love you independent of your sexual values. A woman, and this is John Paul II, it's a great quote for all of you women to meditate on. A woman is capable of truly making a gift of herself only if she fully believes in the value of her as a person and in the value as a person of the man to whom she gives herself to. Which is why for a woman to say no to the sexual advances of a man shows that she has a great understanding of her value and her dignity as a human person. And this is why a man who refuses to be emotionally manipulated by his girlfriend to do things he wouldn't do shows his value as a human person. And if you look in your relationships that you have with the opposite sex, rare is a relationship in which your significant other is not asking you to do things that you shouldn't be doing. And to say no to them shows your own dignity as a person. And it's a great gift then to that person that you just don't acquiesce to their desires, because it trains them to value you more, and it helps them to value themselves more. Okay? John Paul II has this great quote. Anyone who cannot recognize the value of the person as such, but only the sensual and sentimental values, confusing love with eros, will complicate his life and others. The greater the feeling of responsibility for the person, the more true love there is. Only if it is an objective good for the two people to be together can they belong to each other. If we are to speak of choosing a person, the value of the person must itself be the primary reason for choice. But primary doesn't mean only. Can you choose somebody because you think they have a beautiful voice? I've always wanted to marry a woman with a beautiful voice. Would that be wrong? No, absolutely not. I mean, if I had 3 women to choose to marry, and I looked at her, I looked at all 3 of them, and I said, I could love each of these objectively for who they are as a person, but this one has a prettier voice, I'd marry the one with the prettier voice, right? I mean, all things being equal, you're going to marry the person that most gratifies your sensual and sentimental desires, because that's a good. To have your sensual and sentimental desires gratified is a good. It's a good that you desire. It's something that you want in the relationship. And it's something that you would desire that you would be for that person, right? When a person says they really like how you dance, it really excites me, then generally that makes you happy, right? It's because you want to be seen as a good for that person. But it's just that the love can't be based on that. The love has to be based on this person as a good. This is key. I'll leave you with this line, and then we'll continue next week. This is John Paul II. Only when love is put to the test by a loss of sensual and sentimental content can its true value be seen. So only when you've lost all sensual and sentimental value for that person can you really measure whether you love them or not. Okay? Which is why I always say, for 90% of the cases, when does love start in a relationship? When they're married. All right? Let's say you're engaged. Brianna, you're engaged. Sorry, I'm going to pick on you. Anybody else in here engaged? Just Brianna. Sorry, Brianna. Brianna's engaged. Does she love her fiancé? If I asked her, she'd say, I love him with all my heart, right? All right, how long away is the wedding? All right, so let's say 5 months. Let's say for the next 4 months, the man you're in love with gets on your nerves every day. You no longer get any gratification from him, sentimentally or sensually, and he doesn't get anything from you. You're on each other's nerves. After 4 months of that, are you still going to get married? Probably not. You'll probably look at each other and say, you know, this isn't going in a good direction. Let's just call this off, okay? Let's say 5 months after they get married, that happens. Let's say 4 years and they have a couple kids. What happens? What's your fiancé's name? Evan. You know what's happening? Brianna and Evan are sitting down and going, let's figure this out. Because you're my wife and I love you and I want to love you. And your good is my good. And we got to figure this out. And that happens all the time in marriage. And marriages go through that rough, but they love that person. You know, it's a choice, it's a will. I made a decision to love you. I love you. You're driving me nuts now. But I desire your good. And that's why you want to marry somebody who has the moral character to be able to do that, which is the most important thing you're looking for in a future spouse, is that type of moral character. So that's the first thing you're looking for. So if you marry somebody of good moral character, your marriage will work. It might not be the most romantic, exciting marriage in the world. You might not have the greatest conversations over dinner, but your marriage will work because you married somebody with good character. So, all right. Any questions? All right, go out there and, yep. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm a big. Okay. So this is my advice to to block this, okay? First of all, you're not going to be able to say no to that. It would be psychologically unhealthy. So the goal is to see it, appreciate it, enjoy it to the level that it's not sinful, but not give it free rein, okay? So imagine, you guys all downhill skiers? So love is like being on the top of a ski hill, and you can go down that ski hill one of two ways. You can just bomb down the ski hill and hope you don't wipe out at the end. Or what you can do is kind of like, I've never done this before, so I'm going to snowplow all the way down. Right? In a certain sense, in your love relationships, you're snowplowing. Because you can't help develop this. But you're going to snowplow a little bit just to keep it on the down low until when? When can you let that when can you let at least this stuff kind of let go a little bit? Engagement, when you're engaged, right? So that's why I say, until you're engaged, don't be exclusive. Because exclusivity is all about this. Women love that. That's why they want to be exclusive on this, on the second date. There's a lot of guys that want to be exclusive on the second date too. I don't want to put it all on women's shoulders. There's plenty of guys that want to be exclusive too. But if you can push away exclusivity, even if you are exclusive, you can still kind of not be formally exclusive. Like it's obvious I'm the only one you're dating, and you're the only one I'm dating, but I'm not going to put any attachments on you. I'm going to give you total freedom. You be you, I'll be me. And, it kind of just puts brakes, if you will, on the development of these things. Does that kind of make sense? I've had in my life only like two or three couples have done that. The best couple that ever did this, and this was a couple at St. Paul's who did it really well? Was Joe Gaggs and Mariah. They went through, people didn't even know, they were kind of dating, they came here as high school sweethearts, and they said, look, we're in college, and I don't want to tie you down, I'm going to, you just do what you want, but they still just kind of held that back. People didn't even know that they were in love, and suddenly they were engaged. But it was two people that had a real, solid understanding of the other. The best couple I ever heard was, this couple was going out, and this was two really rock-solid people. And one, they were doing a semester abroad, and they're like, you're going to Spain, and I'm going to Chile, and I just don't want to think of you in Spain thinking about me all the time, and you can't go out with a girl because, you just do whatever you want in Spain. I'll do whatever I want in Chile. And when we get back at the end of the semester, we'll get proposed and get married. Unless we get back and we don't want to be. And that's what they did. So I think it is possible. The reason it's so foreign to you, you would have to read Alistair McIntyre's book, Beyond Virtue. A philosophical decision was made at the beginning of the 20th century to base virtue and morality on subjective emotional experience. That's the world you grew up in. There is no such thing as objective reality, objective truth. And so our whole philosophical system is based on that. That's why you read old stories. They used to forbid people to exclusively date. It was just forbidden. Going steady was just like, you just didn't do it. Yeah, well, if you look at, there is one extreme as arranged marriages, which is what they do in India, so I'm not going to that extreme.
So how long does it take this generation to detox to where they can actually
I think it's going to take a number of generations. I think we just as we slowly inched into it, we're going to have to slowly, back out of it. I'd say like for you as parents, just don't allow your kids to exclusively, I would say right now, if I was a father, you know, do what you want, but my advice is don't exclusively date unless you see yourself 6 months away from being engaged. If you can see yourself engaged in 6 months, fine, be exclusive. But if you don't, not that you have to be engaged, but you be able to be engaged after 6 months. Or something like that, you know what I mean? Just some little step. Or just, you know, just keep your options open and not be, oh, anyway, I'm not going to go on and on. I got so many. All right, that's it. Thank you.